A basic create post mutation is in place, but now we need to be able to validate our token and extract the user from it. And that is not too far off on how we did it in a REST API. First of all, we need to ensure that we send the token in a header of our incoming request. And if we have a look at our front-end code, and there at feed.js, which is where we do create new posts, we do that in the finish edit handler. There we do indeed attach our token to the outgoing request. This is still the wrong URL here, but this is how we will send the request in the end. So we'll have that token in the URL. And previously in the REST API, we used the isOf middleware to get our token from there, validate it, extract the user data, and add the user data, the user ID, to the request object. And that is pretty close to what I want to do now. I will just tweak it a little bit. I'll name it auth because it's not just there to validate authentication, it will also give me the user data, but that is something purely cosmetic. In there, I will still, first of all, get my auth header. I'll check if it is set. And if it is not set, then I will do something different though. I will not throw an error. Instead, on my request, I'll set isOf to false so that I can handle this inside of my resolvers. And then I will return next to continue with the next middleware and not execute the other code here. That is why I also have the return statement. If we do have the auth header, we continue, we extract the token as before, we try to decode it just as before, make sure this key here matches the key you used in your resolver for signing the token, by the way. If these two don't match, you have no chance of validating your token. We catch an error, but if I get an error, I again don't throw it. Instead, I set request isOf to false and return next here too, to not execute any other code. If the decoded token is undefined, I also throw no error. Instead here, again, I set isOf to false and I return next. And if I make it past all these checks, I will get my user ID from the decoded token and I will set isOf to true, so that is a new property I add to the request and I call next. Now this tweaked middleware is something I add in app.js before my GraphQL endpoint. So here I will simply import that auth by requiring it from middleware auth. This is my middleware and I will add it here like that. This middleware will now run on every request that reaches my GraphQL endpoint, but it will not deny the request if there is no token. The only thing it will do is it will set isOf to false. And then I can decide in my resolver whether I want to continue or not. And this is the next step. In my resolvers, there, I don't care about isOf and create user and so on. So there I will just not do anything with that information. In create post, here, I will first of all check if request is auth, if that is not true. Because then I know, hey, the user is not authenticated, I certainly don't want to grant access to creating a post. So if the user is not authenticated here, then I will create a new error, not authenticated. And I'll set a code of, let's say, 401, and then I'll throw my error. And therefore, the other code in this resolver here will not execute. If the user is authenticated, we can continue. Then we validate the input, and then before we create the post, we can now also get the user from the database. Because remember that we do store the user ID in our request as well. So in the resolver, right before creating the post now, I can get my user by awaiting user find one, or not find one, I can actually use find by ID, of course, and there I pass in request user ID. So exactly the thing I'm storing here. I passed it in, and now I get a user. If I don't get a user here, then something is wrong, and I will throw an error. So here, invalid user maybe, set the code to 401 and throw that. But if we make it past that, we have a user object with which we can work. And now on the newly created post, I can set the creator equal to my extracted user. So to the user I got from the database. Once I created the post, I can now also use that user and access the posts of that user to push the created post onto that list of posts. So to set up that connection. That is now it. And now we need to work on the front end to also send a request to this endpoint so that we can see that in action. On the front end, in the finish added handler function in the feed.js file, there, I'll ignore the image upload for now. I want to now reach my GraphQL endpoint and create a new user. For that, first of all, I will get rid of this code because I will not send this request to different URLs anymore, and I'll not use different methods. It's always the same URL and the same method. Localhost 8080 GraphQL, and the method simply is post. The body is also not my form data, but here I'll create a new query with let because this will change when we edit the post later. And my query here is GraphQL query. My query here is defined as before, query. And then this is a multi-line string with backticks. It then actually is a mutation, and the mutation is create post. To that, I need to send the data I did on my graphical user interface. So actually, I can copy that here, move that over there, and now replace these hard-coded values with dynamic values. So here, for the title, I will pass post data title. For the content, I will pass post data content. And for the image, I'll keep that to some URL for now until we have a real image. I get back the ID and title. Now let me, first of all, send this in a stringified version, the GraphQL query. And then let's do something with the response. Now again, this way of handling it will not really work. So let's instead copy the code. We use an app.js where I check for errors on the extracted response body. And therefore I do it here. Then I log my response data, and you see I'm interested in the ID, title, content, creator, and created at here, so I should actually retrieve all of that. So in my query, I get the ID, title, content, image URL, creator, and created at date. By the way, the creator, if you have a look at my schema, is again a more complex object. It's a user object. So for the creator, we need to be more specific, and that is the cool thing about GraphQL. We can really drill into the data. And here, let's say I'm only interested in the name. And indeed I am. I don't care about the ID or email. In this scenario here, I want the name so that I can render that onto the screen next to my posts. And this shows the power of GraphQL really well. We get exactly the data we need. Well, now with that, we sent the post request. Here, for extracting that data, we'll have some problems. But first of all, let's focus on what we logged to the console and see if that works. So back to our application. I am still logged in because I have a valid token. And I do still attach this token, by the way, here. But we also need another header. We need to add the content type and set that to application JSON. That is required. So make sure you add this. And now back in the application, click New Post, add a duck. You have to choose an image here, even though it's not uploaded. Otherwise, you can't submit. And then I'll add my lovely duck. And here, I get an error, which was expected. But I also see a console log, which actually doesn't look too bad. I do have all the data I entered, and we can now have a look at MongoDB Compass. And there, if I refresh this and look into my posts collection, I indeed see a post with the data I entered, with that creator ending with AA1. And if I have a look at my users, I see that is that user, and there on the posts, I'm unfortunately missing my post. So that is one thing we'll need to tweak, but the rest is already working really well. Let's make sure we add that post here too, and then of course, let's make sure we extract the data on the front end correctly so that we also render that post. For that, by the way, we'll also have to make sure we load all posts initially though. Now let's first of all fix the fact that our user does not have the post added to his posts array. The reason for that is that I do push the post here, but of course I forgot one important thing. I never saved that change. I need to call user save here, and I'm not interested in the result, but I certainly want to await it nonetheless, so that I only return after this has been done. So this is one important change, and this is only one change we need though. We can quickly validate whether it works, however, by going to posts. Let's delete that post which we added here. And now let's go back to our front end, add a new post, another duck, choose an image even though it's not getting used. Let's add some content and click accept. We still get that error, but if we go back to Compass and we have a look at our users, for the first user, we now also see that post here. So that is now working. And now let's make sure we also extract the data correctly on the front end and that we then also load all posts so that we really can see them there. Now for the data extraction, we see that this is the data in the format we get it back. An object with a data field, then the name of our query, and then in another nested object, the fields for that query. And this is exactly how we have to retrieve our data. So in our React code, in feed.js here, when I create my post there and I try to access response data post, this will not work. I have to access rest data, data, create post. So here it's rest data, data, create post ID. And that is the case for all these places where I do access fields on my created post. Now with that, we should not get an error message anymore when I create a new post at least. So let's try that out. A cup. Let's choose the cup image, though it does not matter, we're not uploading it. Hit accept, and I don't get that error anymore. So extracting the data works. Now let's focus on adding a query that allows us to get our posts so that we can also render them here. This is also a great practice for you. We'll do it together in the next lecture. Try fetching your posts on your own. Try creating that query on the backend on your own. You don't need to tweak the front-end code. If you can do that, perfect. We'll do it together otherwise, but add your GraphQL query and test it with the graphical interface. Let's make sure we can now also get all posts. And for that, I'll start on the backend in my schema again. Getting, that of course is a normal query. So next to login, I'll add a query and I'll name it posts. You can name it however you want. I don't need any arguments here. I instead can directly define my return type, and that will actually not be an array of posts as you might have expected, but actually I'll create a new type for that. Because remember that in the REST API, we also did not just return an array of posts, but for pagination, also a number that specified our total amount of posts in the database. So I will create a new type, and I'll name it post data, which now has a posts key, and that will be my array of posts. And I'll also have a total posts field here, which will be an integer. Now, post data is what my query here should return. And now we need a resolver for that. So let's head over to resolvers and there I'll add posts. I'll write this as an async function like this. I will actually not care about the first argument for now, my args, but I will need the request to find out whether the user is authenticated. That is actually the first thing I'll check, and I'll copy the check from create post, this if statement here, and I'll add it here. Now, if the request is not authenticated, if the user is not authenticated, I'll throw an error. Otherwise, I'll later add some pagination logic, but for now, I want to find the total number of posts and then all posts. So total posts can be found by awaiting post find, this gives me all posts, and then count documents. The posts themselves can be found by using await on post find like this, and again later I will also add skip and limit. For now I'll only add sort, and I will sort by created at in descending order. I will also populate my creator to fetch the full user data with the name and so on, because I'll need all that on the